Which brings us back to not everybody has a positive experience with Christianity and religion. And assuming all that we said last week about really listening to people, about winning the right, about being patient and kind and compassionate and really trying to understand and not getting real preachy and having a stance where it's not about winning an argument, but it's about coming alongside. Today, I want to lean into the reality that there are many people whose experience of Christianity and religion has left a sour taste in their mouth. And sometimes it is expressed in disgust, especially, like what will end up happening is people will look at Christian history and they'll say, what about the Crusades, and what about the Inquisition, and what about the fact that Christians, actually argued from the Bible to have slaves, and what about all of the wars and all of the things, awful things that are done in the name of religion? I mean, doesn't it do more harm than good? And wouldn't the world be a better place without religion? Now, I do think that when people speak about the generalities of things like the Crusades and the Inquisition and stuff like that, I mean, they're real issues, and we should be able to have, at least a discussion where we could help people, understand, exactly what we believe, why we believe, and how we deal with things like those things that have happened. At the very same time, I think that we need to be sensitive that oftentimes people point to those general things because they've experienced some personal hurt and they're not ready to share what they've experienced yet. But because they've experienced the hurt, and then they look at the other things that have caused hurt, they start there. And so we're going to focus on the bigger issues as far as these general things about the attack against religion in general and some of the things that have been done in the name of Christianity. Because in part, well, if you and I are ready to at least speak into some of those things and help remove those obstacles from people where it's like, oh, I can see why you follow Jesus even though those things have happened. Well, that might clear the way that they would be willing to discuss maybe some of the more personal things that may be at the very root of their problems. But, we may need some time and help, and we may need to show that we really care to get there. Wouldn't the world be a better place if we just got rid of religion? It's a hard question, in part because today when people are asking this question, it's not so much a question as it is an accusation, and there is a lot of anger and there is a lot of heat. In the mid-2000s, we had a string of best-selling books written by a group of people who became known as the New Atheists. Their leading voices were people like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Sam Harris. And their books were New York Times bestsellers for years. And all of them were articulate, credentialed, and angry. But they also were able to put their arguments to words in ways that, were, compelling. In his book, God is Not Great, Hitchens captured the attack against religion when he wrote this. As I write these words, and as you read them, people of faith are in their different ways planning your and my destruction and the destruction of all the hard-won human attainments that I have touched upon. Religion poisons everything. Now, I have to admit, I didn't realize that you and I right now are plotting the end of human civilization. But, that's part of the accusation is that, religious people are trying to destroy all of the advancements of humanity. Wow. Religion poisons everything. Now, their attack against Christianity and religion is not new. You can go back 50 years to John Lennon and his song Imagine. And in a very winsome, whimsical way, he uses words to paint a picture. And a pretty simple song, actually, but here's some of the lyrics. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy to try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Later he will add, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us. And if you look at all that he says there, he goes, if we could get rid of religion, belief in God, he adds politics and capitalism too. He says, then the world would all live as one. Now, there are a lot more significant thinkers than John Lennon who helped pave the way to where we are today as far as secular society. You can go back and you'll find names like Voltaire and Hume and Darwin and Feuerbach and Nietzsche and Freud. And all of them helped to lay a foundation where this idea that there is no God could be accepted by people. Now, it's still important for us, and especially in our secular society where we've experienced Christianity in particular, but religion in general, to be pushed out of the public square. That atheism is a relatively new thing. In 5,000 years of recorded human history, atheism has really only been on the scene in any representative way for about 250 years. A very small percentage of people really identify this way. But it doesn't make it right or wrong. It just is it's a fairly new thing. Now, for us who believe, especially for us, where we are confessing, and hopefully all of us have had a life-changing experience with Jesus Christ where we have a sense of conviction that he's real and true. We should not be defensive or angry or, upset as people are asking these questions and trying to wrestle through this stuff. We shouldn't come across as being defensive. We should be committed to showing respect and also wanting truth to prevail. This is one of my deep convictions, is that if I'm really wrong, I want to know about it because I want to align with reality. But the best way to get to truth is not through coercion or fear, but it's through open dialogue, giving time, letting ideas and things be experimented with, testing hypotheses. But the reason that I go to the new atheists and I'm focusing my attention there, we can go back a couple hundred years and look at different things. The new atheists are coming with a combination of anger and hate for religion. And this anger and hate seems to be infecting the mood of our culture. It is much more acceptable to despise religion and Christianity today than any other time in our culture. And it's, we have to understand it's because they don't believe that it's just foolish or misguided or mistaken to be religious. They think it's dangerous. In the words of Hitchens, they believe that religion poisons everything. The accusations of Dawkins, Harris, and Hitchens is religion is unjustified belief. It is things that you hold on to in the face of evidence that is the cause, this is in their own words, of the most monstrous crimes ever perpetrated against humanity. All these wars, all these divisions, all the problems of the world all go back to religion. So, let's wrestle with that. Now, here would be what I would want to kind of point out at the outset and then try to reason through with somebody. I think their accusation falls into a common logical fallacy. Correlation does not equal causation. And let me first of all, I'm going to give you kind of a lighthearted example of this. Have you noticed that our world is becoming more and more divided? Have you noticed that especially in our country, there are deep divisions, especially political divisions? And I'm pretty sure that I know the reason why. Because when I was a child, I had a very terrible experience with chili beans. And chili beans are they are the source of the world's problems. Because it turns out that all of these politicians and pundits that are leading to the deep divides, they all eat chili beans. Or at least the vast majority of them do. And if we could just get rid of chili beans, just imagine how much better this world would be. Just imagine how much better it would smell. I mean, it would be so wonderful. Now, you could sit there and go, Ralph, I think you have a bean problem. And okay, well, if not beans, what about technology? Technology poisons everything. Just think about where we are now. Our globe is at a threat because of pollution, and that's all because of human technology, right? And then we have weapons of mass destruction, and all of that is because of technology. And what technology has brought us, do I even need to talk about social media? Technology poisons everything. Oh, wait, I've got another one for you. Money poisons everything. Really, money is the root of all kinds of evil, and there is so much greed and so much just terrible things that are done because people want money. And if we just got rid of money, everything would be so much. Money poisons everything. Or sex poisons everything. Or politics poisons everything. And I have just given you the plot of pretty much every Hollywood movie for the last 20 years. Just because something is ubiquitous, just because we can find human technology or human industry or religious practice mixed in with all the problems that our world has gone through, doesn't mean that it's the cause. Correlation does not equate to causation. Second, the premise is that if we could just get rid of religion, then the world would just be a much better place. Imagine, everybody would just get along. It would be so wonderful because religion poisons everything. Well, we have actually some historical examples where societies intentionally drove out religion. The first one was the French Revolution, and it was a great celebration of the age of reason. And they wanted to tear down all religion and get rid of all religious practice in France. And if you don't know the story of the French Revolution, it very quickly devolved into anarchy and to mass murder and the guillotine. And it was scary for the whole world. And some more modern examples, the Soviet Union and Communist China, two regimes of power that very intentionally are atheistic at their core because it's part of their philosophy. And they tried to snuff out or suppress all religious activities. How is that going? Does that lead to more peace? Well, from any objective matter, standard, if you want to look back, the removal of religion and the suppression of religion became more violent and gruesome, and those societies devolved into more inhumane examples of what oppression looks like. Um, but what about all the wars that are done in the name of religion? What about how divisive religion is? I mean, people hold on to this and they're willing to go to battle for it. Wouldn't the world be a better place? Wouldn't it be more likely that we'd all just get along? Well, would it? Charles Phillip and Alan Axelrod are the editors of a 3-volume, it's pretty massive, Encyclopedia of Wars. And it documents 1,763 wars between 8,000 BC and 2003 AD. In saying encyclopedia, what they try to do is to name every war that we're aware of from a 10,000 year period of time. Out of those 1,763 wars, they categorize 123 of them as religious conflicts. That's only 7% of the wars over a 10,000 year period where religion is at the center. And if you wanted to do a little bit more digging into it, out of those 123 conflicts, well, it's a little bit questionable that they're primarily about religion. William Kavanaugh has written a book called The Myth of Religious Violence, published in 2009. And he said that in many of these 173 instances, they were not primarily religious, but were driven by secular and political goals. Kavanaugh then points to some inherent hypocrisy of the secular attack against religion. Secular Western societies love to differentiate between our violence and their religious violence. Religious violence is irrational and fanatical because they allow their religion to influence their politics. Our violence, being secular, is rational peacemaking and sometimes regrettably necessary to contain their violence. You know, we find ourselves obliged to bomb them into liberal democracy. This is the same hypocrisy of all the finger pointing at the Crusades. While some awful things were done over the 100-year period of the 4 Crusades, what started the Crusades is really not categorically different than the Western powers providing help to the Ukraine right now as they were invaded by Russia. If you go back in the history, how this began is that the Byzantine Empire, which was a Christian empire, Greek-speaking, began to experience incursion, attack, violent aggression by outside invaders who started to take over the lands that they had occupied for centuries. And as they were coming to the capital and getting closer to topple their empire, they reached out to their fellow Christians in the West who were Latin speaking and said, could you come to our aid? Now, some things that happened over the course of that time are terrible. And any Christian should be ashamed of that, but only in the sense that sometimes people who claim to be Christian don't live up to the teaching. Now, it is estimated that in the 20th century, instigated by secular atheist regimes, some 100 million people were murdered through wars and oppression, which far outpaces all of the people who've been killed in all of the religious wars in history. While we could say, well, see, atheism is a problem. It poisons everything. That could be falling into the same error of them. Correlation does not mean causation. Instead, I want to ask a different sort of a question, and I'd want people to try to, like somebody I was talking with about this, trying to see something maybe a little bit different. Politics, technology, money, sex, and religion, they can all go terribly wrong. But these very same things, technology, money, lovemaking, religion, they can also be the source of tremendous good. What do they all have in common? Us. We human beings. We are the ones who can take technology and use it for good or use it for harm. We are the ones who can do things either for good or ill. In the words of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Nobel Prize-winning author who detailed the horrors of communist Russia, who out of his own experience would have been justified in saying, look, politics poisons everything. He was a Christian, and this is what he wrote. The line between good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties, but right through all human hearts. There is a problem in our world, and the problem lies right here. We, all of us, have incredible potential, both for harm and for good. Now, at this point, we're starting to get pretty close to gospel country. I mean, when we start getting to this place, this is the part where we're kind of, okay. I mean, and Jesus knew that we had this problem and he wants to save us. But before we get to gospel country, we want to back up a little bit. So the accusation is religion poisons everything. What exactly do we mean by religion? It is sometimes forgotten that this word religion is not an easy word to define. A century ago, James Fraser, in his book, The Golden Bough, and this is from 1890, he wrote this, and this was kind of where people were at the end of the 1800s. There is probably no subject in the world about which opinions differ so much as the nature of religion. And to frame a definition which would satisfy everyone must obviously be impossible. But the push of secular society was to have a term, religion, that could summarize and categorize all of the different beliefs and practices that people have when it comes to transcendence, God, other gods. I mean, this is the part. I mean, there's so many different religions in the world, so many different practices. But who decides the definition of religion? Who makes the rules? If you get to make the rules, you usually get to determine the outcome. And if we can decide that all religions are basically the same thing, so then we can dismiss them all and move into a secular society where nobody believes in anything spiritual, well, that's one way to play the game. But when we do this is one of the real problems is that with the term religion, there are so many different practices, so many different beliefs, so many different things. If you try to just put them all in the same bucket, the only way that they can fit in the same bucket is if you reduce them down into something that is a poor imitation of the original. And so often what I experience is that when people are attacking Christianity, they aren't attacking a robust Christian faith, but a cheap imitation that they've gotten from our culture that's watered it down into something that looks like everything else. But it also means this. Oftentimes, when people are attacking our beliefs, religious faith, Christianity in particular, the things that upset them often are things that I don't believe in and upset me too. People have problems with organized religion. So do I. People don't like religious hypocrisy. Neither do I. People using religion as a means of oppression. I'm totally against it. The Spanish Inquisition. It is a dark stain on Christian history. Now, if you give it just a little bit of historical study, though, there's some nuance to it. And that is that this is one of the things where it was more probably political than it was religious in nature. It was something that the Spanish Empire was using because they'd been occupied by the Muslims for a couple of hundred years, and they were angry and they were upset. And more often than not, the priests who participated in the councils that led to people being tortured was the voice of moderation that was trying to pull back the state from being more oppressive. But even with all of that, it was terrible. the justification of slavery? Terrible. Those people weren't reading the Bible well. But also remember this: the abolition of slavery, twice in Western civilization, all came because of Christians convicted out of the teachings of Scripture that this way of treating people is absolutely wrong. I'm a pastor, and I don't even consider myself being very religious. But see, this goes back to who defines religion. And there's a part where people can have, these different, but as somebody who practices the Christian faith, well, maybe I can share with you a little bit about my understanding of what religion is. I believe that God created every one of us, and he created us for himself. And he created us in such a way that our life is found in him, and he wants to be in an intimate relationship with us. And so there exists some sort of a God-shaped gap in every one of us. And all of us in some way long for that relationship to be fulfilled. And the religions of the world are human attempts of trying to reach up to God and respond to that feeling, that experience, that reality of that gap inside, so that it can be filled. But this is important. Religion is really humanity's attempt to try to reach up to God and in some way come into relationship and please God. And that is the key feature of religions. And I would say not all religions are the same. Some religions got more right. If I need to give you an example, the religions that sit there and actually allowed for human sacrifice were more wrong. And the ones that said that you shouldn't have human sacrifice are more right. You know that most religions throughout all of human history have not been about morality, about calling us to become better people who treat people better. That's something that's uniquely of biblical religions. You know that morality doesn't exist in most Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism because everything's really relative. But the concern for morality is a key feature of biblical religions. The secularist wants to lump all religions together and say that we all basically say the same thing. But how can we say that we're all saying the same thing when most forms of Hinduism and Buddhism say that God is everything? Or they say there's many different gods, versus Christianity and Islam and Judaism that say there's just one God. If you turn to the Bible, and especially in your modern English translations, you will only find the word religion a smattering of times. The NIV only has it appear 6 times. It isn't a popular word because the Bible really doesn't put itself forward as a religion. The most famous is from James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. And this is 2 of the 6 occurrences, and they occur in 2 verses. And now remember, this is a translation. So the Greek word was different. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. In this place, the idea being expressed is your outward devotion or practice that shows your commitment to God. And so here they've taken this idea of outward commitment as devotion to God, and they've used that word as being religion. Now, in James' definition of religion, I probably wish that I would be a little bit more religious. Because here, religion is just, here are things that if you really love God, here are things that God says this would be good things for you to do and to be about. But I think the most helpful definition of religion is humanity's attempt to reach up and be in good relationship with God. And with this definition, I would argue that Christianity isn't really a religion. And it is, in fact, one of the things that distinguishes itself from all of the other faith traditions in the world. In every other instance, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, whatever you want to go to, in some way, it is functioning about here are the things that you as a human being need to do so that you can get into right relationship with God. And that is not the core of the Christian faith. It is not about what we do so that we can please God. It's about what God has done so that we can be in relationship with him. Okay, now we're starting to get back into gospel land, evangelism. And I want to step back and I want to go back to the new atheists. Their anger and their revulsion towards religion has, over the last decade, become more focused. Now it's not just a general attacks against religion, but what we're, I think, seeing even more in our culture today is an attack against Christianity itself. Now, this makes it hard in one way, but it's also good because you see, one of the things that I want to do about getting to religion is to say there is something unique about Christianity that distinguishes itself from all other religions of the world. And I want people to consider Jesus. And I want to try to get them to start considering Jesus as soon as possible. But today, in our culture, where we are, it seems like the attack isn't just religion poisons everything, but Christianity poisons everything. Now, maybe the biggest reason for this is the coalescing of religion and politics. I read a book a couple weeks ago called Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. It is a New York Times bestseller, and it is describing the threat of Christian nationalism. In the last year, I have read a number of articles that have all been put forward with this threat that Christianity and Christian nationalism has. So next week, we're going to talk about that and politics and Christianity and how we believe Jesus calls us to be in the world and not of the world and how we should engage politically. But with that aside, just to say that there's more of an attack against Christianity, and it's probably in many ways related to that. It's a good thing to get people to start focusing their attention on what do we Christians really believe. Because we want them to start considering Jesus. But what if people's anger and revulsion isn't against Jesus? What if it isn't about his claims or what he offers? But what if people are only rejecting a poor imitation of what they think Christianity is, but they're not really rejecting Christianity itself? Let me give you another lighthearted example of this. I hate Mozart. So, I don't understand how anybody could like that music. I mean, it is obnoxious, and it doesn't, there's no rhythm, there's no art to it. Now, some of you maybe say, what is he talking about? Well, so I got to hear Mozart from the middle school band a few years ago. And all I can tell you is that, man, I walked out of there with a headache. I mean, I really love seeing the kids, but, the music, I can't understand why they chose the kids to play that music. It was so terrible. Have you ever heard Mozart besides that? No, that was the one. That was enough. After that, I'm like, I don't need to hear anymore. That's how it goes. Well, Ralph, you may not want to judge Mozart based upon how the middle school band was able to play Mozart. What? Yeah, you may want to go and have, because it is a little complicated. And it does take some real skill. And the middle schoolers, they just don't have enough yet. So if you were to go, if you really want to judge Mozart, you should go to like a major city orchestra, like the Boston Philharmonic. And there, see if you like it or not. And you get where I'm going with this, is that oftentimes people are judging Christianity and they're judging it on a poor playing of Jesus. And this is a part where we need to come back and we just say, none of us will play Jesus perfectly. But if you're going to judge Jesus, don't judge him based upon him being played poorly. Judge him on his own life, on who he is, on what he did. But then also look at the people who played him well. When Jesus' teachings get approximated somewhat well, we have a strong argument to make that Christianity is the strongest force of good on this planet. Orphanages, hospitals, universities, human rights laws, the abolishing of slavery, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, the Sisters of Mercy, World Vision, compassion, and I'm just beginning. But let me quote for you an atheist socialist psychologist, Jonathan Haidt. And he says this with a little bit of amazement because he's still an atheist. But this comes from a work called The Happiness Hypothesis. And he's like, what really leads to human flourishing? And he says, surveys have long shown that religious believers in the United States are happier, healthier, longer lived, and more generous to charity and to each other than are secular people. Religious believers give more money than secular folk to secular charities and to their neighbors, and they give more of their time and they give more of their blood. And in it, he spends a whole bunch of time telling you that these new atheists and their attack against religion, they are not faithful guides because they're not really willing to look at the facts. Where people practice their religious beliefs, live them out, they flourish. Things go better. Sheldon Van Auken nearly a century ago wrote, the greatest case for Christianity is Christians. Their bliss, their assurance. But the strongest case against Christianity is also Christians. When they are somber and joyless and haughty, conceited, then Christianity dies 1,000 deaths. But the problem isn't with Jesus or with his teachings. The problems are really with us who play Jesus. But let me tell you this. I may not play him perfectly, but you have no idea what my life was like before and how far I've come. This becomes one of the things where it's just like, that sometimes we can speak about just our own, and it may not be that impressive, but if you had known me back then, so let me tell you a little bit about then you'd realize, no, I may not play him very well, but I'm no longer in middle school at least. At least now I've moved a little bit forward. Will you pray with me? Loving Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, your commitment, your love, your passion, your goodness. May you bless us and keep us in Jesus' name.